I serve as the Associate Dean in the College of Engineering, as well as the Chief Technology Officer, and I also direct our engineering online programs. So, I recognize my area of strength is the technology and the innovations that you have for some of the teaching, developing training programs. And so if we go to the next slide, I want to share with you some of my colleagues that will help me talk about the career pathway for the water sector. So the time we have with you this afternoon, Carla, she's going to give you some data about the water workforce, which is, again, similar to some of the data and information that you already know, and hopefully some information will be new. Next, Erica will talk about the K through 12, as well as, well, kindergarten to the university. That came up in our breakout session. And what's interesting, she'll talk about the connections that 4-H can bring to really helping to bring awareness to the careers in the water sector. And finally, Jacqueline, she'll take us to the hiring and the workplace. How do we find talent, attracting and retaining a diverse workforce? So with that, we'll go to the next slide, and I'll introduce Carla.
Thank you, Dr. Scales. So developing a strategic workforce planning involves giving a careful look at projections and data. The Bureau of Labor Statistics estimates that advancements in technology and automation will phase out some jobs. Up to 33% of the current US workforce may need to switch occupational groups by 2030. About 3 million of all infrastructure workforce, including the water sector, is expected to retire, and 10.6% of water workers on average will retire or change occupations every year over the next decade. So projections also indicate an increasing demand for skilled workers across water occupations. Next slide, please. The following data is based on national average across 111 water occupations, including both rural and urban areas pre-pandemic. So here clearly the lack of gender and racial diversity is notable. In 2017, nearly 85% of them were male and 2/3 white. 53% of water workers reported less formal education, high school diploma or less, while only 14.9% hold a bachelor's degree or higher. Next slide, please. Water workers tend to be older, and the lack of youth is noticeable. So two things are clear. We need young, educated, and diverse talent, and we also need to capture the institutional knowledge of the retiring workforce. Regardless of their level of education, water occupations tend to pay more on average compared to all occupations on national level, but also pays up to 50% more to workers at lower ends of the income scale. And this is very important. I mentioned earlier that automation and advancements in technology will phase out some jobs and create new roles. So here in this slide, there are some examples of new roles and the likelihood of water companies that will adopt them. Some of them, you can see big data, machine learning specialists, information security, cybersecurity specialists, just to name a few. Next slide, please. In a survey conducted among 36 water organizations in 2017, leadership and managers reported the need for upskilling staff in leadership role. Three relevant skills were mentioned: critical thinking, leadership, and digital literacy. A previous presenter elaborated more on this, but leadership roles are evolving, and you can see that. So just to finalize this part, in creating a partnership to train a future workforce, involving universities and educational institutions seems to be the way forward, and also learning from previous existing training programs. We can talk a little bit more about this in the breakout session, but the Environmental Protection Agency had an interesting repository of training programs where reporting benefit and challenge. So I will turn it over now to Erica to talk more about K-12 programs.
Thank you so much. I'm really looking forward to kind of talking to you a little bit about how do we do innovative solutions in kindergarten through university. Next slide, please. So when we think about creating a structure to be able to deliver K-12 and create pathways into the workforce, it takes a structure that it was able to expand past just one locality and be able to start somewhere and move. And the 4-H system, which is through the land-grant university system, is one of those delivery modes that really has an opportunity to be able to create that structure since it is in most counties and parishes across the US and internationally. Next slide, please. So what does that pathway look like? And so currently 4-H is structuring a careers pathway program, which starts with exploring, then learning, practicing, and experiencing. And the opportunity is to grow upon ideas and concepts that then grow into practical skills that can be used in the workforce. Currently, there are career pathway programs in STEM, computer science, natural resource education, and one starting in career and workforce readiness. One of the main examples that I want to share with you is about the National Fluid Power Challenge, which is actually my dissertation research. What it was a partnership with the National Fluid Power and creating sustained programs and curriculum that increase the STEM skills needed for a workforce in both the technical and university level education. Next slide, please. And creating this pathway is one of the ways that we can kind of start to see how do we create something that engages youth to be wanting water careers when they finish. And that is exploring what it is in elementary school, learning and practicing using project-based learning in middle school, and then experiencing in high school, whether it's through internships, participating in a water certification program, which leads them leaving high school with a certificate that is recognized by the water workforce. And then also creating virtual and face-to-face mentorships and apprenticeships at the university and college level as well. Next slide, please. So what does this give us? This gives us that entry point into creating that pathway or that pipeline into the workforce. Creating skills and STEM skills and life skills along the way, but also getting youth an opportunity to understand what jobs are available for them in their communities. Next, we're going to talk about the recruitment and deployment. Jacqueline?
Thank you, Erica. Next slide, please. In many countries, companies struggle with an aging workforce as well as global skills shortages, rapidly shifting demands from customers and employees, and growing pressures to be diverse and inclusive. To respond to massive and rapid change, business leaders must be able to anticipate how changing strategies and business models will alter their organization's workforce needs. They can benefit greatly from strategic workforce planning. Strategic workforce planning is the practice of mapping an organization's people strategy with its business strategy so they work in sync. This approach delivers two critical advantages. It helps leaders understand whether they have or can obtain the workforce to execute their business strategy. It also assists HR leaders in reorganizing, shaping, and deploying the workforce to deliver on their company's business objectives. Next slide, please. There are several challenges with attracting a diverse and new generational workforce for the water sector. A gap in the pipeline can be attributed to underrepresentation due to a lack of skilled technical talent and women, while another gap is corporate culture. In a 2010 study conducted by Hill, Corbett, and St. Rose, it was revealed that women's lack of interest in pursuing engineering careers was attributed to a lack of exposure to this discipline, as well as gender-related barriers. The researchers further explained that gender stereotypes prevented women, especially women of color, from STEM roles due to biases about math and science aptitude and gender-appropriate roles for women, which still exist in the workplace. Therefore, we must devise strategies our strategic goals and objectives in addressing underrepresentation, as well as closing the gender gaps in the pipeline. The U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics Employment Projections Program identified 3 critical areas that will change the future landscape of the water sector. 1 is separations, 2 is growth, and 3 is vacancies. The BLS Employment Projections Program estimated that around 3 million workers will retire or transfer out of the water sector by 2026, leaving an average of 220,000 job openings annually. The program also identified a faster growth trend of 9.9% of water occupations compared to 7.4% of occupations nationally by 2026. So how do we overcome these challenges to fill and retain the pipeline? Some strategic initiatives happening now involve an overhaul of job descriptions by transitioning from technical verbiage to more contemporary language that highlights how engineers are improving the well-being of others, increasing awareness and access to STEM jobs in the water sector that align STEM education with interests of girls K through 12 and collegiate and professional women, and building strong partnerships with organizations like the National Society of Black Engineers and the American Nuclear Society. Creating professional development training opportunities that are technologically advanced using tools such as automation and virtual trainings is critical to further professional development into 2026. Strategic initiatives happening now to retain employees in the pipeline are focusing recruiting efforts on critical job types needed within the next decade, such as plumbers, construction laborers, and operating engineers, employment engagement, career pathing, mentorship programs, cross-training, and rotational assignments. Next slide. To recap, strategic workforce planning initiatives must take place to attract, retain, and mentally change the perception of the future of the water sector. Due to this new movement, K through university initiatives, recruiting and retaining talent strategically, along with a cultural mind shift, needs to happen. By doing so, K through university learners, underrepresented groups, and water sector workers and leaders are actively engaged. Succession planning, roundtable discussions, outreach programs, summer camps, and partnerships are some strategies already being utilized. But what can we do that has not been done before? I want to thank each of you for giving this some thought. Now I will turn it back over to Glenda.